Welcome to the second round of the FY25 round of the Community One Stop for Growth. My name is Ashley Stolba, and I'm Undersecretary of Economic Foundations with the Executive Office of Economic Development. On behalf of the Healy Driscoll Administration and Economic Development Secretary Yvonne Howe, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for your interest in supporting and advancing economic growth in your community. So this is our second webinar in a three-part series. Thank you to those of you who joined yesterday and were watching online. A recording of that first webinar, if you did miss it, which is an overview of the One Stop, will be available on our One Stop website soon. The third webinar in this series is our technology webinar focused on how to use the application portal. Webinar 3 will be pre-recorded and posted directly to the One Stop website tomorrow, which is February 8th. In addition to our regular One Stop webinars, new this year, we will be pre-recording and posting a webinar for each program in the One Stop. The program webinars will be available on the One Stop website on February 16th. We do invite you to submit your questions through the Q&A function on your screen. Questions will be aggregated and responses will be posted in an FAQ document on the website. So again, I am joined by the awesome dream team at the Executive Office of Economic Development. We have Assistant Secretaries for Communities and Program, Juan Vega, and we also have Pat Shannon, our Community One Stop Coordinator, and Helena Fruccio Altman is also on to monitor all of the questions. So the purpose of today's webinar is to guide you through the One Stop application and help you understand where your projects fit within the One Stop development continuum. We will start with a review of the important topics covered in our first webinar, and then dive into the explanation of how your projects fit with the One Stop with a series of example applications based off submissions from last year's round. Finally, we will wrap up with a summary of key takeaways and next steps. So I'm now going to pass it over to Juan Vega to take us through the rest of the slides. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ashley. So we want to start this webinar. This is our webinar. We want to start by kind of reviewing a little bit of a recap from the first webinar. And so, again, we want to reiterate and review all of the programs that are included and have been fully integrated into the Community One Stop for Growth. And so here at the Executive Office of Economic Development, we have MassWorks, the Rural Development Fund, Urban Agenda Program, and the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative. At the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, we have the new Housing Works Infrastructure Program, the Housing Choice Grant Program, and the Community Planning Grant. And with our third partner, the Mass Development Finance Agency, we have the Underutilized Properties Program, Site Readiness, Collaborative Workspaces, the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, and Real Estate Services Technical Assistance. We want to finally, we want to have you visit all of our programs on the website and review the respective guidelines, as well as sample application templates specific to that program. Again, to recap, we want to go over the development continuum, which is a critical component of the One Stop. It represents the life cycle, as we see it, of any major community development project, from the initial stages of community envisioning and to final construction. Applicants should look to the development continuum as a guide for where their project might fit within the One Stop. All projects submitted to the One Stop should fit within a single development continuum category. The development continuum is broken up into two broad categories. As shown here on the left, we have preparing for growth section, and that includes the earlier stage projects and community activation, placemaking, planning and zoning, site preparation, cleanup of sites, etc. And then on the right-hand side, we have the other group, which is catalyzing specific projects. This is where you're going to find the programs that are providing grants for actual construction, in the building category for vertical work, as in the infrastructure section for horizontal construction. Next up, we want to just kind of recap the specific sections. The first part of the continuum, which is the preparing for growth, includes the sections outlined here. And these are the grants that support activities and initial steps by community-based actors to attract and guide private investment into their communities. The grants provided through these categories generally support activities and initial steps to attract and guide private investments. This could include creating a business improvement district, developing a municipal master plan to guide development, or conducting the preliminary site work needed to attract private investment to a specific lot. And then the catalyzing specific projects part of this, as I've already mentioned, is the building and infrastructure. Projects in these categories support the implementation of construction activities to leverage private investment that will lead to new commercial, industrial, or residential development, as well as any other improvements to further the community's vision. The buildings category supports vertical construction, including the rehabilitation of blighted structures and the build out of new collaborative workspaces, for example. While the infrastructure category supports construction of publicly owned horizontal infrastructure projects to make improvements to roadways, water, sewer, and electrical utilities required to create more housing and jobs. Next up, a quick recap here of the one-stop full application, which is actually the vehicle for the applicants to request grant funds. All applicants are required to complete 3 forms in order to submit an application. The first form, Form 1, will ask for the applicant information about the organization that is submitting the request. Form 2 is where you will really get into all the details related to the project and the request for funding. This is all the project information. And then Form 3 is certification pages. This is where you would certify the authority to submit the application on behalf of the entity and attesting that all the responses are true and accurate. It's very important to note that applicants seeking funding for multiple projects must submit a separate application for each. While there's no limit to the number of applications an organization can submit, it is important to keep in mind that similar applications in the same categories will inevitably compete against each other. I will now hand it over to Pat to review a series of project scenarios and discuss how the applicant would apply within the one-stop.
Great, thanks, Juan. So before jumping into the project scenarios, I do want to take some time to highlight the single most important question in the application, which is question 2.4, project category for grant consideration. So the answers provided to this question guide the questions that the applicant is asked throughout the rest of the application, and the answers also largely determine which programs will review the application for funding. This question should be familiar to those of you that applied in the last round. While some of the options have changed, the general structure of the question remains the same. Applicants will be required to select a development continuum category, and then a subsequent project type and project focus that best fit the project being proposed. So at this point, you've heard us talk about the development continuum categories. Each development continuum category is broken up into multiple project types. The project type is a general description of the purpose of the project, and each project type ties directly to a one-stop program. So when you're filling out the application, you can hover over the radio buttons next to each project type to see the program associated with that project type. So here on the screen, you can see, in this case, brownfield site cleanup is selected, and there's a radio button saying that these applications are generally reviewed by the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So after you choose a project type, you'll be asked to choose a project focus. So while the project type is centered on the goal of the project focus describes how funds would actually be used. So again, on the example on the screen, you can see that if the application received an award, funds would be used to conduct remediation of a brownfield site, as opposed to site assessment, both of which are eligible uses of funds through the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. So now we'll dive into the project examples. We have 10 different scenarios with different types of projects to show how the applicant would answer question 2.4. So here in the first example, we have a municipality that wants to conduct a public engagement process to create a wayfinding and branding program in its downtown. In this case, the end product would likely be a study with recommendations on how to best move forward with the project based on the conditions and nuances of the downtown and the community. This is a great example of a project that could benefit from funding through the Massachusetts Downtown Initiative, which lives within the community activation and placemaking development continuum category. So MDI provides $25,000 worth of consultant technical assistance to identify strategies for improving a community's downtown area. So when filling out the application, the applicant would select community activation and placemaking as the development continuum category, and then they'd select technical assistance for downtowns as the project type. The project focus list shows the different types of studies that can be funded through the MDI program. And in this case, the applicant would select downtown wayfinding / branding consultant services option, as that's the best fit for the scope of work for this project. All right, so next up, we have a municipality seeking funding to develop a new zoning bylaw to come into compliance with the multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities. This municipality is both an MBTA community as well as a housing choice designated community. So here we have a project that fits within the planning and zoning development continuum category. This particular project would be considered a zoning revision, which is one of the 3 project types tied to the community planning grant program. In addition to zoning revisions, the program supports community plans and planning for housing projects. So in this case, the appropriate project focus would be zoning revision to comply with Section 3A of MGL Chapter 40A, which is the multifamily zoning requirement for MBTA communities. This was an option in the last round, and we've already seen quite a few MBTA communities take advantage of this offering, and we hope to see more applications come through this round. So because the town is also a housing choice community, the application is also eligible for review by the Housing Choice Grant Program. So when completing the application, the community would actually need to opt into answering a series of additional questions specifically related to the Housing Choice Grant Program in order to be considered for funding by the program. And so the applicant will see that option immediately after question 2.4 when completing the application. All right, so now we have a city that would like to have a consultant study strategies to encourage redevelopment in a commercial district containing underutilized properties. In this case, the applicant will choose district redevelopment technical assistance as the project type within the planning and zoning development continuum category. There's only one project focus for this option, so the applicant will select planning for growth in a commercial, industrial, or mixed-use district. District redevelopment technical assistance is a new project type within the planning and zoning category. These projects are primarily funded by the Real Estate Services Technical Assistance Program, and they support planning projects that are focused on driving economic development activities in commercial, industrial, and mixed-use districts. Examples of some of the planning activities include planning for district redevelopment, conducting corridor studies, or even preparing for district improvement financing. The project area should include underutilized properties and or municipally surplus properties for the application to be competitive. All right, in example number 4, we have a rural community requesting funding to prepare a site plan for a town-owned parcel next to an existing industrial park. The town is seeking funding to prepare a subdivision design of the site prior to conducting physical site work. So the purpose of this project is to do some of the early legwork required to make the site attractive for future development. So now we're moving into the site preparation development continuum category. This project is a good fit for the site readiness program, which is represented by the site work improvements to unlock development project type. The scope of work for this project is focused on earlier stage design work. So when looking at the project focus options available, the applicant would want to choose site readiness pre-construction as opposed to the construction option. Site readiness projects require that the applicant select an option for an additional sub-focus layer to further specify which eligible pre-construction activity the project will engage in. So here in this case, the applicant will choose site plan design. Again, that fits the scope of work being proposed in this project. And this application is being submitted by a rural community, so it's also eligible for review by the Rural Development Fund in addition to the site readiness program. Any community with a population density of 500 persons per square mile, 500 persons or less per square mile, and a total population of less than 7,000 is automatically designated as a rural community for the purposes of this program. The Rural Development Fund will consider projects submitted through the planning and zoning, site preparation, building, and infrastructure categories, with the exception of brownfield and collaborative workspace projects. In past rounds, rural communities have been asked to complete some additional questions in order to be considered by the program. This year, we're removing that requirement, so those communities will automatically be considered and eligible for review. Here we have a brownfield site cleanup project. So a town is seeking funding to conduct a site assessment on a formal industrial site that is now owned by the town. Potential developers are hesitant to invest in the property due to fears of contamination. So this project is a fit for the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, which provides grants to municipalities and other public entities for the site assessment and remediation of contaminated publicly owned sites to help attract future private development. It's important to note that there are some strict eligibility criteria for this program, including requirements that the contamination cannot have occurred under the municipality's ownership. Mass development does have some opportunities available outside of the one-stop to support brownfields projects that don't meet the requirements for one-stop funding. Okay, so next up, we have an application from a city looking to extend its water and sewer infrastructure to allow for the development of a new apartment complex. This is an infrastructure project that supports a residential development. With the introduction of the Housing Works Infrastructure Program, the project types within the infrastructure category are now split by the type of development that they support. So first we have public infrastructure to support housing growth, which is tied to the Housing Works program. And then second, we have public infrastructure to support mixed use and commercial industrial growth, which is tied to MassWorks. Housing Works' mission is to fund infrastructure improvements to unlock much needed housing across the state. So they will be primarily looking for projects that support fully residential development, such as the one described here. So in this case, the applicant will choose public infrastructure to support housing growth as a project type. The project scope includes the construction of water and sewer infrastructure, so they will select a corresponding project focus. So again, this is a case where there is a fourth sub-focus layer. So the applicant will select construction as the project focus and then water sewer infrastructure as the sub-focus. Switching to the other side of infrastructure, here we have a municipality requesting funding to support streetscape functionality and safety improvements needed to allow a major development to move forward. The support development includes street-level commercial space along with 30 units of housing on the upper floors. So although similar to the last example, the infrastructure improvement here supports the development of both housing units and commercial space, making it a mixed-use development. Because there's a commercial element, this project's best suited for review by the MassWorks infrastructure program as opposed to Housing Works. So here the applicant will want to select public infrastructure to support mixed use and commercial industrial growth as the project type. A couple of important program notes about MassWorks. First, to be competitive for funding, the public infrastructure improvements should directly support a private development with a developer identified. Projects that support the development of a public building, such as a public safety building or a recreation facility, will not be competitive for funding through the program. In our eighth example, we have a small town requesting funding to improve the safety of one of the community's major roadways. The road is particularly dangerous in inclement weather and accidents are common. The project includes a full depth reclamation as well as drainage, subdrain, culvert, and guardrail improvements. So in addition to funding infrastructure to support private development, a portion of MassWorks funding is dedicated to granting awards for small town road improvements to enhance public safety, which many of you will know as STRAP. So this funding is only available to municipalities with a population under 7,000, and awards are capped at $1 million. It's important for any community that submits a STRAP project to demonstrate that the existing road conditions present a public safety risk to make the funding a requirement. Only applicants that are eligible for STRAP funding will see this project type option in the infrastructure category when they're filling out question 2.4. All right, so now we're going to look at a couple of examples where applicants have multiple projects. First, we have a nonprofit that is seeking funding to create a new entrepreneurial collaborative workspace. And they also would like to request funding to support the operation of a youth workforce development program that will operate out of the new workspace. So we've seen a few cases like this over the last couple of years. Although the two projects are related, they are in fact two separate projects. The first is a project that should be submitted in the building category within the creating collaborative workspace project type. And then they'd want to select collaborative workspace fit out as the project focus as they're looking to build out a new collaborative workspace. The second project falls in the community activation and placemaking category within the equitable workforce and business development programming project type. And the applicant will also choose workforce development, training initiatives, and job pipelines as the project focus. So the first project is likely to be considered by the Collaborative Workspace Program, and the second project is likely to be considered by the Urban Agenda Grant Program. It's very important to remember that applicants with multiple projects must complete a separate application for each project. Each application should focus on the scope, needs, and impacts of that particular project for which funding is being requested, and they'll each be reviewed independently. In our last example, we have a for-profit developer that is looking for funding to support the redevelopment of an underutilized historic property that they'd like to turn into 10 housing units with retail space on the street level. The developer also owns a previously abandoned property 3 blocks away and seeks additional funding to make the building code compliant to allow for the construction of new commercial space. So the two projects described here have similar scopes and will likely result in similar applications. However, they are in different locations and need to be submitted as two separate applications. They're two separate projects. In both cases, the applicant will choose underutilized property rehabilitation as the project type within the building development continuum category. Both of these are construction projects. So again, the applicant will select underutilized property construction as a project focus for both as well. So based on the selections made in 2.4, both of these applications will likely be reviewed by the underutilized properties program. So while the applicant is certainly allowed to submit both of these projects, the two projects will naturally compete against each other as they're both being reviewed by the same program. So the applicant may want to consider prioritizing the projects and focusing on the project that they deem to be the highest priority. So that does it for our project examples today. I will hand it back to Juan.
Thank you very much, Pat. So as we have just done, we've walked through many of these project types and examples to demonstrate kind of the use of the development continuum and how each prospective applicant should think about where they would fall and how to select the right project types, et cetera, to get you to the part of the application that is going to be most beneficial. But we also really want to highlight and recommend the use of the expression of interest. This is continues to be an optional item, but highly recommended. And I would just add that in terms of, overall, the Community One Stop, we've made a lot of improvements and also changes to ensure that we're providing as much guidance and information before an applicant begins to invest time in filling out an application. Now, all these full applications that we're talking about need to be submitted through the IGX online application portal, which you will hear more about in the third webinar that Pat mentioned, or that Ashley may have mentioned, actually, that will be posted on our website. But the expression of interest form is launching on February 9th. What the big change here has been that the form will now be available directly on mass.gov at the Community One Stop for Growth webpage. And all prospective applicants here will be able to complete these forms right on the website. The EOI will open on the 9th and will remain open through April 30th of 2024. And again, I want to note the major improvements after folks complete the form. What will happen is you'll receive a feedback report that will talk about where, based on the description of the project, we'll let you know where the project would be a fit, if it is a fit, for any of the funding opportunities available through the One Stop. And if it is a fit, it will include tips on how to submit a strong application, including directions on which selections to make for question 2.1. So the EOI will provide that level of direction to give you exactly the steps you should take to get to the right place in the application. So we strongly encourage applicants to attend and ask questions during the new virtual hour series. Again, I will say that on the EOI, on the Community One Stop website, we have provided all this information about the One Stop. Each of the programs has posted, or you're able to ask their guidelines, which provide further explanation, and if there are any limitations for the funding source, for you to understand. We have these recorded webinars, and we'll post the recordings on the website. As was also mentioned, all of the programs will be recording program-specific webinars. And so we invite you to please take advantage of all those resources to be able to help you understand what the programs in the One Stop are offering, where it may be a good fit for your project. And then ultimately, we will be holding these new virtual office hours. If there is information after you've gone through all those resources, if there's still something that is unclear or a question that you feel has not been addressed that might be a little bit nuanced for your project, these virtual office hours would be an opportunity to then get further clarification. And so those are all posted on the website with the full schedule and the registration link to get to those. So in terms of just overall takeaways, we wanted to highlight and summarize what you've heard today. So the Community One Stop for Growth is intended to boost accessibility for state guidance and partnership, improve the alignment of the various funding programs, reduce administrative burdens on communities, and support strategic project planning. The development continuum category, project type, and project focus options selected in question 2.4 really is what drives all the questions that will then be asked throughout the rest of the application, and will allow you to determine which programs will be reviewing that application. Applicants should always submit one project per application. And as in the example that Pat gave, there were several instances where clearly each project was discrete, and so it was necessary for each of them to submit their own application. And then finally, the Community One Stop for Growth builds on the opportunities for applicants to receive guidance on their project ideas through this expression of interest process, as well as the virtual office hours. It's important to us that you all have the opportunity to kind of understand what the programs, what would make your application most competitive for these programs, and to provide that guidance before you spend a lot of time filling out a full application. So that brings us to the part of the agenda here where we want to, again, first some questions as a reminder, please submit questions through the Q&A option here, which is a great way for us to be able to monitor that and be able to get this information out to you. So let's see. I think to get us started, the first question we usually is, I think my project fits into more than one category. What should I do? And Pat, do you want to just kind of reiterate? You covered this in several of the project examples.
Sure, yeah. So all projects submitted through the one-stop should fit within a single development continuum category. If you do think that you have a project that crosses into different categories, you may want to consider breaking up that project into separate applications. It's likely different. It's likely actually different projects, kind of in the scheme of the one-stop.
Great. Another question we get is, I have, for example, 3 projects that I want to submit. How many applications do I submit? Is there a limit? And so there isn't really any limit to the number of applications. Really, it's a matter of your own ability to put them together. We have, if you look back at the awards made in the past round, there have been communities, large and small, that have submitted multiple applications and have been successful at getting multiple grants in the same round. However, again, I would stress that you look very closely at the type of project that you're going to submit and look at the guidelines for the program. Certain programs do have limits, and they outline that in their guidelines that say we will only consider making 1 grant to the community in any given round. So a program may have its own specific limits, but overall for the one-stop, there is really no limit to the number of applications. In a similar kind of vein, someone has asked, they're considering 2 applications for projects that are within the same category. And so the question is it allowed? The answer to that is yes, it is allowed. However, we would put the caveat that the applications submitted like that in the same category will, in fact, be evaluated, and judged against each other along with all the other projects in that category. So a good rule of thumb that we try to advise applicants is think about, make a judgment on what is the more priority project in that category that you want to submit. So technically, yes, you can submit more than 1 in the same category. Just know that it's going to be, they will be competing against each other. And like I said, some programs in the one-stop do limit 1 grant for their particular program per. So that's important. And Pat, it looks like we have a question queued up for us.
Yeah. So it looks like the first one is just, will the slides be available afterwards? Answer is yes. We will be uploading both the recording of this webinar along with the slide deck here, I believe by the end of the week.
Great, thank you. Next up, it looks like there's a question here about is there a chart or graphic available that goes all the way down to the project focus level?
Yep, so we do have, on the one-stop website, we do have a page dedicated to the development continuum. So if you go to mass.gov/one-stop, you'll see there's a table of contents. You can click development continuum, and then you can click a link to get to the development continuum website, where we do have a graphic that shows all of the project types and project focuses.
Excellent. So we just have a shout out here. Somebody just thanking us for the helpful and additional guidance this year. So thank you for that. So let's see, do you fill out an expression of interest per project or just an application? So let's see, so submit one. So it's probably, as we mentioned in the first webinar, it's probably important to note the big change with the expression of interest for those of you that have participated in the past is we used to have, you used to submit it through the IGF system, and there was a limit to the number of projects you can submit. It was 5, and then it was reduced to 2. So in this new process, the form is available. There is no limit to the number of expressions of interest that the same entity can submit. The limitation is that each EOI will take one project. So if you have multiple projects, you would submit one EOI for each of them, and gain from our team a report for that specific project. Is there anything else we add there, Pat, as far as the EOI?
Just repeat the question.
One application.
Yeah. So yeah, EOI is just one per project. Yeah, I think you covered it one.
Great, thank you. So next up, we have a question. Let's see, if we received funding last year, but the project needs more funding, can we submit another application? A similar question we get each year as well is if I receive funding last year, I apply again for something else. So for that part, yes, you can certainly apply, or I guess for both, in both instances, the answer is yes, you can apply again. If you have received funding in the past, that has no bearing on what application, if you have a new project this year. In the case of the same project, I would just say, again, you can apply. However, a project that has already been vetted and a funding commitment was made to that project based on a private development or number of units of housing or for jobs, etc. It's going to be less. I will just say it's going to be less competitive, given that there will be many other projects that will need funding to get their project started. So technically, yes, you can fit for additional funding. The reality is that it may be, depending on the program, it may be less competitive, given the increasing demand on these resources. So let's see, if two communities are working collaboratively on developing food-related maker spaces, but in two different locations, should they submit it together as a regional project or two separate projects? So Pat, you want to take that? You covered that in one of your slides. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So this is a case where we have two different projects that are two different locations. So those should also be two different applications. I will note both the applicants are certainly, it may be beneficial within the project description, within the application to note that that there's a related project, maybe just for some additional context for reviewers, but yes, those should definitely be two separate applications.
Great, thank you. Let's see, there's another question. Can we apply for construction of the same project, Housing Works or MassWorks, that includes both streetscape and water and sewer? If so, how could we apply? I think here it'll depend on what the kind of end use of the development or what the development is getting at. What you'll find as you work through the application is projects that are housing or residential only, and really focus on that, will be reviewed by the Housing Works infrastructure program, whereas projects that are more of a mixed use or commercial in nature will be reviewed by MassWorks. And yes, in most cases, both programs would take a project that includes some streetscape as well as water sewer work. I would just caution that for both programs, we will be taking into account the timeline for how long these projects. Sometimes what happens is we'll ask projects to really prioritize if the water sewer work needs to get done first, and that'll take a 18 to 24 month period to get done. To apply for that, get that out of the way, because the streetscape commitment for streetscape money, you may not be able to utilize that money for another year or two out, and so that's going to be taken into account in the evaluation, the timeline. MassWorks, for those that have applied, know that we imposing 3-year performance period as a max to get the grant, get it contracted, and get the project done.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, just to clarify that this is just one project. So when you're applying through the One Stop, although we do have, each project type is tied to a particular program, we do engage in a collaborative review and work together to make sure that the appropriate programs are reviewing the applications. So I just want to make clear that you know, you should just submit one application in this case, and then kind of at the end of the day, we'll work out to decide whether Housing Works or MassWorks is most appropriate.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good point. Thank you. So let's see, we have here some issue about confusion between the EOI and the full app on the matter of if you submit more than one, do you compete with yourself? And so it's important to note that the expression of interest is really just a guidance phase. There is no, there's no actual decisions being made at that stage. And so you could submit, you know, 10 different project ideas and get the feedback and then make some decisions strategically about which ones you think you want to proceed to submit a full application for. It is only the full application stage where you're actually requesting funding and outlining the project plan, your timeline, budget, etc. And so that's really if you go ahead, which you can, that, you know, let's say, you know, I'm going to pick, you know, brownfields projects. You want to clean up a site readiness and you submit for 2 parts of your town and submit 2 applications. That's where you'll run into the situation where in the evaluation, there will be consideration given to the fact that you have more than one application and they will be evaluated essentially against each other. And if one is amended, it'll be, you know, whichever one is stronger, but it may not be the one that you needed. So that's why we ask you to think strategically about, you know, each annual round to submit things that you really have priority over for that year. The next one here, Pat, do you have an example of a building collaborative workspace fit out equipment category?
Yeah, so collaborative workspace fit out is basically helps pay for costs required to like bring either physical equipment or some enhancements to the collaborative workspace to turn it into a functional workspace. So it could be construction in the building, bringing in 3D printers or industrial refrigerators if it's a shared kitchen. Basically, it's the costs required to make the workspace happen. So as opposed to obviously the feasibility study is kind of the pre-development, like gaming it out, seeing if it's possible. Fit out is when you're ready to make the workspace a reality and start to get jobs in there.
Thank you. Let's see, another question we have here is if a project is made up of 3 individual components, all based around accessibility. So one is a second floor lift, another is an outside rampway, and then a wheelchair accessible front door. Should this be 1 EOI or 3? So presuming that this is all in one building, the same building, you're doing the lift and the ramps and the door to the same building, then that would be considered one project together. And so you would submit it as one project. You would outline the components. And then again, being mindful that in the EOI, you will submit that and you will get some guidance on how to best approach the application. But that's different than the actual application. That's where you will actually make the request for funding. One piece of advice you may get from the programs is, you know, if you price this out, is the request very large to do it all in one swoop, you may want to consider getting phases, if you know. But again, that would be part of some of the feedback you may get. My nonprofit has a project that could be eligible for underutilized properties or rural development funds. So we would just note that as a nonprofit, the nonprofit could in fact apply to the underutilized properties program for a project that's a rehab of a building. but the nonprofit would not be eligible for the rural development fund. That part of the one stop is reserved for municipalities and public entities. However, you could ask the municipality that, partner up with the municipality if there are components that perhaps could be publicly owned, or a partnership there with the municipality where the municipality could apply together with the organization. But again, depending on the ownership, it's really going to be a matter of the ownership of the site that'll determine which programs could be applied to. And again, you should talk to the leadership about any potential partnerships. What say you, Pat, about maximum and minimum?
Yeah, so we have a question here about maximum award amounts. So the maximum award amounts depends on the program. Some programs have strict maximums, some have more kind of ranges that they generally give out, but we definitely recommend reviewing the program guidelines. The program guidelines will state whether they have a maximum or not. We do have links to each program website on the One Stop webpage. So again, mass.gov/onestop is a great resource. You go there, you'll find links to each program page where you can find the program guidelines. I will also note that in the application, we will have links to the guidelines. After you fill out question 2.4, a message will pop up essentially telling you which program is most likely to review the application. And you'll have links to the guidelines there as well. So we highly recommend reading the guidelines.
Great. Let's see, we have so a question here. Last year, we submitted 2 related projects under separate grants and were only awarded one of them. Later, we were told that we could have combined them as one, which this may have come out if we had done the EOI. Will the new process prevent this? I'm not sure that we could say prevent it. What we would say is, each application, each program evaluates the applications it gets on the individual merit of that application. And so one or more or 2 applications may not have changed. Had it been one or had it been separate, may not have changed the outcome. Again, I think we say throughout, and most of the guidelines will say, use some strategies to try to make your application stronger and more competitive, depending on, again, the program and where the initiative falls in the continuum. That may warrant, having it separate. So it'd be better to be separate. In some cases, it's better to be combined. But each application is being evaluated on its own merits within the pool in that category.
Yeah, and Juan, I'll just note that specifically related to the EOI. So if you were to submit those 2 separate projects, or submit those 2 separate projects as expression of interest, in each case you'd get an EOI saying this project is eligible for this program. And so if you get multiple, so in a case like that, that's really a great opportunity to take advantage of the office hours. You'll be able to directly ask the program managers, questions like that. They won't tell you whether, the program, it's not a place to gauge whether you're likely to get funded, but that's a great question for an office hour to see if a situation like that is more appropriate as one application or 2.
The next question is, in the expression of interest, if you complete a substantial amount of the actual grant application, does the information automatically transfer? I think, unfortunately, no, the forms are different completely this year, but I will let you.
Yeah, so so now that we're moving the EOI, so let me take a step back. So in the past years, the Form 1, the applicant information was the same in the EOI and the full app. So if you submitted an EOI, it transferred over to the full application. This year, now that we've taken the EOI out of the IGX system, we no longer have that link. However, I will say that if you start one full application, the information in Form 1 will transfer if you start another application. We've also upgraded the technology so that for those housing choice communities, if you fill out an application and complete the whole housing choice section, and have an application where you again would like the application considered for housing choice funding, the housing choice section only needs to be filled in once and will carry forward to future applications.
Thank you. Seeing a little bit of slowdown here in the questions. We do have, and thank you everybody for the submission of questions. We have a large audience today watching this webinar live, and we've been getting a lot of great questions. Some of them we'll need to take a closer look at and plan on, to the extent that we can, we'll aggregate some of these and post them on the website after. And so let's see, seeing questions. Yeah, I think that as Pat has noted, and Selena has reiterated, a lot of these questions would be best suited for the office hours when they get really specific. So we do want to encourage, again, look at the guidelines, look at the webinars that we've done so far, and then the program webinars that are going to be going up afterwards, as well as utilize the expression of interest phase to get a lot of that feedback. You'll find that a lot of your questions will be answered that way. And if you really have a more specific item or issue that you've run into or challenge you're trying to figure out that has not been answered through the guidelines, the office hours a great opportunity to kind of to get further advice. Okay, I think that kind of concludes our webinar for today. I think, as Pat already mentioned, the slides as well as the recording of this webinar will be posted on there. So just next steps, the significant benefit of the One Stop is that it creates this opportunity for additional for us as state reviewers to work collaboratively and be able to make some better decisions on grant making. So thank you for joining us today. We'll post everything, and we will be posting, as was mentioned already, the third and final webinar, which will be focused on the technology part of all this. So in terms of how to log in and access and how to navigate the system. So please visit the Community One Stop for Growth webpage at www.mass.gov/onestop. And if you have any particular additional questions or items to ask about, you can email the program at or this initiative at onestopmass.gov. So thank you, and good luck to everyone as you start preparing your applications.